My son was diagnosed with something far scarier than cancer. "Mom, my head hurts and I feel dizzy," he said. Could I, at that moment, imagine how frightening those 5 words were? Like any other mother, I crouched down and said, "Let me see." He looked pale, his eyes unfocused. I tried not to panic and thought about what it could be. Nothing but the worst possible scenario. I remembered that, the night before, while he was playing, he seemed fine. What, for God's sake, could have happened? With great effort, trying not to scare him, I calmly said, "Put on your shoes." 20 minutes later, we were at the doctor's office. After examining him, the doctor asked my son to wait in the reception area and called me for a private conversation. "Is it serious?" I asked. The doctor looked at me in a way I'd never seen before, as if my question underestimated the gravity of the situation. "He has something very rare, a brain aneurysm about to rupture. We need to act immediately." Tears started to form in my eyes. "Tell me he'll be okay." "I can't guarantee that," the doctor said. "The situation is extremely delicate. We need an MRI to better understand the location and size before any procedure." Before I left, he gave me a note with the date and location of the exam. He also recommended that I keep my son calm and avoid any physical exertion until the procedure. The next morning, I went straight to the indicated location and met Dr. Jasper Hares. "Hello," he said, looking at my son. He crouched down and asked, "What's your name?" My son answered, and the conversation annoyed me. All I wanted was for the exam to be over so my son could get back to his normal life. Dr. Hares led us to a room, gave my son a hospital gown, and started the exam. I waited in the waiting room with a book in hand, but I couldn't read. My mind was completely occupied with my son. Later, Dr. Hares entered the reception area with a grim expression. "Please, come with me," he said, leading me to a room full of medical computers. He pointed to a chair near a large screen. "Please, sit." He showed me the imaging exams. "My God," I exclaimed, covering my mouth with my hand. The images showed a large aneurysm in a critical area of the brain. "We can't wait. We need to operate immediately," the doctor said. "I've never seen anything like this in a child his age. It's extremely rare." I cried as he tried to comfort me, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Please," I begged, "save my son." That day, we couldn't do the surgery because of the complications caused by the coronavirus pandemic. I was grateful that I had been able to schedule the exam and tried to stay calm. At that moment, my son seemed to have no idea what was happening, or at least that's what I thought. On the way back home, he, sitting in his car seat, suddenly asked, "Mom." I looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Yes. Grandma says that when we die, we go to heaven. Is that true?" I was speechless. What could I say? How did he get this idea about death? The doctor mentioned something, but it was just a coincidence, or maybe an intuition about the severity of his condition. A tear rolled down my face. "I don't know, sweetheart." Later, my son was unconscious on the operating table. The surgeons were preparing to deal with the aneurysm before it was too late. Before he was sedated, he started crying and asked me to be with him during the surgery. "I want you to be with me," he said. It seemed like he hadn't finished his sentence, as if he wanted to say, "I want you to be with me if I die." I stood in a corner of the operating room, wearing a gown, gloves, mask, and protective glasses. I looked down at my feet, waiting for the inevitable. Whether my son would survive or become only a painful memory. My heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe, but I kept my posture. I had to be strong for him, even though everything inside me was falling apart. The sound of surgical instruments and the murmurs of the doctors seemed like distant echoes amid the chaos in my mind. Time seemed to drag on like an endless nightmare. Then, finally, Dr. Hares looked up and signaled to one of the nurses. She came toward me and asked me to wait outside the room. Reluctantly, I let go of my son's hand, which was still unconscious, and stepped out, feeling a lump in my throat I could barely contain. In the waiting room, I sat in a hard, cold chair, completely oblivious to the world around me. After nearly 2 hours, Dr. Hares appeared. His expression was serious, which made my heart race again. "We were able to repair the aneurysm," he began, but we found something very unusual. We need to talk. My body froze. I followed him into a private room where he explained. During the surgery, we identified signs of inflammation and tissue destruction that are not typical of a common aneurysm. We performed a biopsy and sent the material for urgent analysis. There is something else happening, something we need to identify quickly. Before I could ask more, he continued. In the meantime, we've started treatment to combat a possible infection. We're not sure what we're dealing with, but it's serious. My stomach turned. It wasn't just the aneurysm. Now there was something else, something no one could explain. I felt a mixture of desperation and helplessness I'd never experienced before. All I wanted was for my son to be okay, but it seemed like the universe was determined to test us to the limit. 2 days later, Dr. Hares called me again. This time, his face looked even more tired. He got straight to the point. We received the biopsy results. Your son is infected with Naegleria fowleri, a very rare and extremely dangerous amoeba known to attack the brain. He likely contracted it by swimming in contaminated fresh water. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to faint. An amoeba? How was this possible? I took my son to lakes and pools with the best of intentions, for him to have fun, to be a normal child. How could something so innocent have caused this? And now, what can we do to save my son? I asked, my voice trembling. The treatment is complicated and, unfortunately, the chances of survival are low, he admitted. But we'll begin immediately with a cocktail of medications, including an experimental antiparasitic that has had some success in similar cases. From that moment on, my life turned into a whirlwind of visits to the ICU, meetings with doctors, and sleepless nights beside my son. He alternated between moments of clarity and delirium, his tiny hand holding mine with less strength each day. The fever was relentless, and every time he convulsed, I felt as though a part of me was dying along with him. Meanwhile, my anger grew. Why hadn't anyone warned us about the dangers of this amoeba? Why hadn't those responsible for maintaining the lake done anything to prevent it? I wanted to blame someone, anyone, for my son's suffering. Days turned into weeks, and despite all efforts, his condition worsened. In a moment of lucidity, he looked me in the eyes with a weak smile and said, "I love you, Mommy." It was as if he knew that we might not have much time left together. My heart shattered at those few words. The doctors did everything they could, but the infection had already caused irreversible damage. The night my son passed away, I stayed by his side, holding his hand, until his little body stopped fighting. My pain was unbearable, but something inside me changed. I decided that no one else would go through what I went through. I used my pain as fuel to seek justice, to expose the dangers of Naegleria fowleri, and to fight for stricter regulations in public bathing areas. My son's death would not be in vain. Today, every victory I achieve in his memory feels like hearing his laughter again. Even though he's no longer here, he lives on in every change I make, in every life I save. But no accomplishment can erase the void left by his absence. It's a battle I carry every day, driven by the eternal love I have for him. After my son passed away, my life was never the same. Pain became a constant companion, a shadow following me wherever I went. Losing a child is a wound that never heals, but over time I realized that I couldn't let the suffering consume me entirely. He deserved more than a destroyed mother. He deserved for his memory to be honored in a meaningful way. The days following his death were the hardest. I got up, breathed, and functioned on autopilot, but every little detail in the world around me seemed to scream his absence. A forgotten shirt, a lost toy, even the trees in the park where we used to play seemed to carry his presence. The emptiness was unbearable. I couldn't get out of my head how something so small, a microscopic amoeba, had caused such a great tragedy. I started reading obsessively about Naegleria fowleri. I wanted to understand everything, every detail, every study, every possibility for prevention and cure. The more I learned, the more I realized how neglected this disease was, and how many lives could be saved with more awareness and medical advancements. And then the idea came to me. Maybe I could do more than just mourn. Maybe I could fight against what took away what I loved most. Going back to school seemed like an absurd idea. At first, I wasn't so young anymore. I had left the books behind long ago, and my life had taken completely different paths. But something inside me burned like a flame, a mixture of determination and anger. I signed up for a preparatory course and went back to studying. It was hard, harder than I imagined, but every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my son's eyes and the silent promise I made to honor his memory. I spent entire nights studying, balancing between pain and books. There were moments when I cried so much that I could barely see the pages, but I kept going. After months of effort, I passed the entrance exam for medical school. When I received the news, I cried as I hadn't since the day I lost my son. This time, the tears were of relief and hope. Entering college was a completely new challenge. While my classmates often pursued medicine for passion or status, I had a personal mission. Every class, every internship, every research project, I saw as an opportunity to learn more to fight this silent and devastating disease. During my years in college, I joined research groups on parasitology, specialized in infectious diseases, and got involved in projects studying new treatments for Naegleria fowleri. My determination did not go unnoticed. When I graduated, I was recognized as one of the best students in my class, not only for my grades but for the dedication I put into every paper and research. On graduation day, as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I felt as though my son was there with me, watching me with that shy smile that always lit up my day. That moment wasn't just mine, it was ours. Today, I am a doctor specializing in infectious parasitic diseases, focusing on Naegleria fowleri. I work at a research center that develops new diagnostic methods and more effective treatments. Additionally, I dedicate part of my time to raising awareness. I travel to schools, communities, and recreational areas to educate people about the risks and precautions that can save lives. Every time I help a family identify a risk, every time I see a child treated in time, I feel I am doing justice to my son. I can't change the past, but I can fight so that other mothers never have to go through what I went through. There are still days when the longing suffocates me, when the emptiness consumes me again, but now, instead of paralyzing me, it motivates me. The love I feel for my son hasn't disappeared. It has only transformed into a force that pushes me to keep going. In every child I save, in every life I touch, I see a little bit of him, and that, in some way, gives me peace. My fight won't end anytime soon, but I know I am where I should be. My son, even though he's no longer here, is the reason I became who I am today, and for him, I will keep fighting forever. But even with this certainty, there is something that never fades. A part of me, the part that lost him, still lives in that day, in that moment when his little hand slipped from mine forever. No matter how much I try to fill my life with purpose, with work and achievements, nothing can erase the emptiness he left. Years have passed, and I've achieved much more than I ever imagined possible. I've become a renowned specialist, received awards, been recognized for my work, and helped save lives. From the outside, it seemed like I had everything, like I had turned my pain into something extraordinary, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Everything I built, all my victories, were a desperate attempt to escape the truth. I would never feel complete again. Sometimes, during silent nights, after a day of work, I would sit alone in the living room, staring at the walls, thinking of him. What would his life be like now? He would have grown, changed, but he would still be my little boy. I would close my eyes and try to imagine his voice, his smile, but over time those memories began to fade, and that devastated me. Realizing that even his memory might fade was a blow I didn't know how to endure. The people around me believed I was an inspiration. They said I had overcome, that I had turned a tragedy into strength. I smiled and thanked them, but deep down I felt as though I was living a lie. I hadn't overcome anything. My pain was still there, buried, but alive, pulsing. Every day, I woke up with the feeling that something was missing, a piece of the puzzle of my life that would never fit again. Some nights, when the silence was deafening, I would enter the room where I kept his things. There were his toys, his books, his clothes. I would touch each object carefully, as if they were pieces of him that I could still feel. Sometimes, I would feel his presence so strongly that I swore I could hear his laughter echoing through the house. But, in the next instant, reality would come crashing back, reminding me that he was no longer there. It was a renewed pain, as if I relived his departure repeatedly. There were moments when I tried to find comfort. I threw myself into work, accepted invitations for lectures, immersed myself in projects that demanded all my attention. But even in those moments, his absence was there, a constant shadow. On the occasions when I saw a child smiling, playing with their parents, my heart would tighten. I knew that these children were alive thanks to the work I did, but the joy was always accompanied by a weight. Why didn't he have the same chance? Even when other opportunities arose, new friendships, new relationships, I could never fully give myself to them. It was as if a part of me was trapped in the past, unable to move forward. My friends would tell me that I needed to allow myself to be happy again, but I didn't know what happiness meant anymore. It felt like something distant, something that existed in a world where he was still by my side. Today, I continue fighting, I continue helping where I can. But, if I'm honest with myself, I know that I will never be whole again. My son was the light of my life, and without him, everything feels dimmer, emptier. No matter how much I've turned my pain into something meaningful, it's still there, a silent companion that never leaves me. Maybe this is all I can be now. Someone who fights, someone who tries, but who, deep down, will always feel like something is missing. I will continue my journey, I will continue to honor his memory, but I know that what he left will never be filled, and somehow, I think I've learned to accept that. Some wounds never heal. They just become part of who we are.